Welcome back to the Jurassic Park Card Game preview videos. Today we'll be going over some obstacles. So what obstacles are, is they represent negative effects happening in other players' parks that you play. That doesn't mean you cause them, right? For instance, vehicle breakdown here, the cars break down in somebody's park. This is an accident, so it doesn't mean that you deliberately, had some espionage mission to go into their park and break down their cars. It just means that an unfortunate circumstances happen in their park and their cars have broke down because of it. The obstacles have 4 subtypes, 3 main subtypes: accident, behavior, and sabotage. Accident represents random occurrences completely out of anybody's control. Behavior represents dinosaur actions that are negative for the stability of the park. And sabotage represents deliberate actions taken against the park. Not necessarily by you as a rival park owner, but there are a few sabotages that actually benefit one player against another. Like stealing money from another player, that kind of thing. Generally speaking, sabotage represents any individual entity taking some deliberate action against a park. Not necessarily a corporate entity. It can be an employee going against the park that they work for, or it could be a random visitor doing something negative. Those all qualify as sabotages. And there's a 4th type of obstacle that's a little bit of a smaller category, which is diseases, which are really particular. They have a lot of mechanics connected with them compared to normal sabotages, or normal obstacles, misspoke. Diseases are attached to dinosaurs. They provide some negative permanent effect until the disease is cured, either through a card effect or through the natural progression of time. So that's kind of the overview of obstacles. Obstacles are broken down into 2 chaos numbers in the deck. Currently that's 3 and 4, but that's a relic of previous iterations and might change for the final release. There's a vague sense of differentiation between the 3s and 4s in terms of card design and balance. Basically, the 3 chaos obstacles are detrimental effects that won't directly stop a player from winning the game, whereas a 4 is a detrimental effect that will or can stop a player from winning the game on their next turn. So the first obstacle we're seeing here is vehicle breakdown. The cars in the park stop working. This is a 4 because it can stop the player from winning the game. Vehicle breakdown in particular is a guaranteed way to stop a player from winning a game. What happens is when the cars stop, only one species in that park that you've played vehicle breakdown on can be exhibited, so they only get income from that single species. Generally, I don't think there's any way in the game you can win the game with a single species. Even a Tyrannosaurus or an Indominus Rex or something, you can't win the game with just that. So yeah, fame total for victory is dependent upon exhibiting the species. So if you play a vehicle breakdown, they only exhibit 1. They can only exhibit 5, maybe 6, 7 fame at the most. Then they can't win. The drawbacks here to balance out vehicle breakdown a little bit more is the fact that it lets the park owner that the vehicle breakdown is played onto pick which species to exhibit. So they aren't forced to exhibit their lowest value species. They can exhibit their highest and still make a bit of money that turn. And then it'll prevent all escape attempts in that park that turn as well, which means that they won't lose any money that turn. So it's very much a way to either stall out somebody's income gain if they have a really widespread park, as opposed to a park that's put a lot of effort into one species being a particularly strong moneymaker. And then it can obviously, stall out the game. Vehicle breakdown, and in fact all the obstacles in these previews, are headliner obstacles, which is why they have their title in this gold font. So of course you only get 1 headliner per chaos number, which is why these ones are pretty strong in terms of their effects. Vehicle breakdown being a way to basically guarantee that that player that you play it on can't win the game next turn. That's why it's a headliner, right? So the next one we'll look at here is litigation. So litigation is a sabotage. In this case, it's an instant obstacle. The way instant obstacles work is they are played and immediately resolved, whereas vehicle breakdown, which is not an instant, is played into a park and stays there to resolve during that player's next turn. So generally speaking, you can counter an obstacle unless it's an instant obstacle, because instant obstacles are resolved during the opposing player's turn, which means you don't get an action to interact with the obstacle before its effect happens, which is not true for obstacles that are not instant. Litigation here removes revenue from a rival player. And the reason this is a 4 is because revenue is an alternate victory condition over fame. You can build your park to exhibit sufficient fame to win the game, but you can also just build it to make enough money that you win the game through having a large revenue pool. In testing, this value is currently 50. It's subject to change. So yes, litigation here is set up to always have a financial drain effect, a small one of 1 revenue. But in effect, it's always going to be more than 1 because they'll always have some fame in their park. So it's generally a minimum of at least 2 always drained. And then, yeah, if the player is getting closer to winning by fame, they'll lose a lot more money, allowing you to penalize them that way. And then there's this additional penalty tacked on here for having a headliner species. So if they have their gold-titled species in the park, they take another financial hit there. So yes, litigation is basically one of the 5 headliner Chaos 4 obstacles, but it's really the only one focused on derailing that financial victory, which puts it into a unique spot. After that, we have the San Diego incident. This will be the final 4 Chaos preview of this set of previews. This is a behavior obstacle, so it represents a dinosaur taking an action of its own volition. You could argue the San Diego incident is an accident or even a sabotage due to the somebody has to bring the Rex to the city in the first place, right? But for the purposes of the game, at least, it's primarily a behavioral obstacle. So what happens here is you play this on a rival park, targeting a species in it. That species makes an escape attempt, and it is the most devastating escape attempt targeting a single species that you can see in the entire game, which is why it's a headliner obstacle, of course. Adding 1 to the security rating of that species, enabling it to break out easier, and then doubling the base ferocity. This is the ferocity printed on the species card, which with the right target can be quite devastating. Potentially a double-digit swing there in revenue if it breaks out. But again, a headliner. You get 1 copy of it, and it precludes you from using litigation or vehicle breakdown or the other 2 unpreviewed headliner obstacles here for 4 Chaos. After that, we get to look at some of the 3 Chaos obstacles. The first one here is Extinction Event. So, as I mentioned before, these obstacles are ones that are not going to immediately stop a player from winning the game, right? Extinction Event goes through the opponent's deck, makes a species in that deck extinct. You find all copies of it, remove them from the game. And yeah, that's what extinct means. So this will never stop a player from winning the game if they have victory, right? If they already have victory on the table, what you do to their deck never matters, right? Extinction Event is something that could matter quite a bit if you get it off early, since you can entirely strip out a species card from a player's deck. Now, the way deck building works is you have 11 species card in a deck is at least currently what the number is. That is subject to change because deck building was the major change that motivated going from the 3.0 alpha to the 3.0 or 3.5 beta. Basically, the deck building, the vague sense of how decks were built and scaled had carried over from like 2.0, and I didn't think it was a fit anymore. Decks should be trimmed down a little bit from where they were. They were 75 cards, now they're going to be 66, which is a weird number, but dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago now with adjustments to the date, so it makes thematic sense. But anyway, yeah, so you'll have 10 species cards in your deck, regular species cards, and then 1 headliner species, and this can strip out one of those 11 to 6 species, depending on how you balance it in your deck. The starter decks, the default decks, it'll be 5 species, 2 copies of each, and then a headliner. So 6 species, one of them gets stripped out. You generally need 3 or 4 species to win the game, depending on which ones you get. So that is something that can make a bit of a difference if it's played early. But conversely, it's also the kind of effect that can do nothing, making Extinction Event a potentially very powerful but also very double-edged sword. Because if the player was never going to draw the species you target anyway, this card has achieved absolutely nothing for you except excluding you out of using other 3 Chaos Headliners. It's a very risky maneuver. Our last preview here will be Ken Wheatley, who is, once again, a Chaos 3. Ken Wheatley is one of 2 characters who show up as obstacles rather than employees. The other one is Lewis Dodgson. So what Ken Wheatley does here is he's a sabotage obstacle, and he's one of those rare sabotages I mentioned that kind of represents you actually taking active action against a rival park. What you can do is you can send Ken Wheatley into another rival park, and he will poach a population token from that park and transfer it to your park. A pretty powerful effect. Once again, something that cannot directly prevent a player from winning the game. Not on the next upcoming turn, right? Pulling a population token off does affect their finances, but it affects their finances over time by a gradual but relevant amount the longer the game goes. But it's not going to stop a player who already has enough money on the table to win the game from winning the game, which is why it's a 3. And so yeah, Ken Wheatley steals a population token from their park, transfers it to a species in your park. Thematically, he'd be stealing the exact same species, but you can't rely on both players having the same species in their park, or the card will be worthless. So instead, he just transfers the token, ignoring what species it belonged to and what species it goes to. It just makes the card more flexible and viable by doing it that way, which is why it is done that way. Potentially, there's some combo potential as well. That's very awkward sentence. By removing population tokens in combination with like damaging effects, to stack those kind of things up and really like tunnel down a species, which gives them a potentially very interesting niche if you're doing kind of a damage-based build for your obstacle spread in your deck. Yeah, that's going to be it for this set of previews. 5 headliner obstacles. We can scan back through them here at the end. I tried to do a spread of them from different films, more or less. But I wanted to pick some that I had updated specifically or created new for this version because I've done an expansion on the card because of shifting around the... let me rephrase that. I've done an expansion on the size of the card pool as a result of shifting around the size of the decks. The decks are smaller, but they have more unique cards in them by a little bit. And I wanted to add a 5th deck to the starting deck roster as well to represent 5 Jurassic films, 5 decks. It made sense, right? So like vehicle breakdown existed in possibly every iteration of the game in some form or another. This is a nerf version of it. Previously, it was a white title obstacle, but it was way too powerful as that. So I nerfed it. Litigation is completely brand new. San Diego Incident existed, was removed, and is back. San Diego Incident was a card in 2.0. It was removed for 3.0, and now it's back in 3.5 with an entirely new effect. Extinction Event and Ken Wheatley were both brand new. Fallen Kingdom was underrepresented in the card pool, so I had to patch Fallen Kingdom up a little bit with some extra cards. That's also true of Lost World and JP3. The focus is in the card design is very much on Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. But that isn't supposed to be at the expense of the other 3 films, and it kind of was. So I'm trying to get more content from those films in now. But Park and World really do lay the basis since it's a park building card game. But anyway, that'll be it for this video. Until next time.